I love fairies. You can literally catch me dressed up as a fairy most weekends during the summer. I often work as a character actress and cosplayer, and this summer I was a fairy character named Xenia at both the Colorado Fairy Festival and the Unicorn Festival. So you can only imagine how excited I was when one of the precons from the Wilds of Eldraine Magic the Gathering set was a fairy typal deck. A huge thank you to Wizards of the Coast for sponsoring this video. If you're interested in getting some of the Wilds of Eldraine cards for yourself, go to the link in the description. This is one of the new Wilds of Eldraine precons. This is Fae Dominion. I love fairies and I've wanted a fairy deck and I am so excited for this precon. Let's open it together. Oh my gosh, the artwork. I am super excited about the Fae Dominion Precon, and I have some fun ideas for how I want to personalize and upgrade this deck. Let's start by looking at the commander options in the deck. The face commander of the deck is Tegwyl, Duke of Splendor. Look at this is our commander. Oh my goodness. So we've got our commander and our alt commander. Both of them are beautiful. Tegwyl has flying, death touch, and other fairies you control get +1/+1. Whenever another fairy you control dies, you draw a card and lose 1 life. I love the flavor text. He weaves glamours as easily as breathing, his otherworldly beauty entrancing fae and mortal alike. And the card is ridiculously beautiful. I really love his wings. But he's not the only legendary creature in the deck that can serve as your commander. There's also Alayla, Cunning Conqueror. Alayla has flying and says, whenever you cast your first spell during each opponent's turn, create a 1/1 black fairy rogue creature token with flying. And whenever one or more fairies you control deal combat damage to a player, go target creature that player controls. Okay, Alayla, Cunning Conqueror. Love her. Okay, wait, I might have to go with the alt commander. It's all about casting spells during your opponent's turns, which we all know I love. And tokens. And beautiful ladies. Okay, well, this is gonna be tough. I'm obsessed. And there are also 3 other legendary creatures with a Dimir color identity that could potentially pilot the deck. Nimrus, Una's Trickster, Obra, Dreaming Duelist, and Una, Queen of the Fae. Although personally, I'm the most drawn to Alayla, Cunning Conqueror. I absolutely love playing cards on other people's turns, and I think that Alayla supports really interactive and fun gameplay. I'm a huge fan of commanders that lean into goading. I love playing commander the entire game, not just on my turn. And I think it's super fun to create more player interaction with goading creatures and leaning into casting spells throughout the entire game. So for this upgrade, I'm picking Alayla, Cunning Conqueror to lead my fairy deck. A little bit about the characters in the deck. Oh my gosh, I love it. Alayla rewards you for playing at instant speed and represents the tricksy nature of fairies by causing your opponents to attack each other by goading their creatures. I want to look for more fairy cards with flash to put into the deck, which will both give us more cards that will trigger Alayla's first ability to create fairy rogue creatures and give us more awesome fairies in the deck. I also want to add in some more support for our fairy theme and goal of casting cards on our other players' turns with cards that reward us for getting fairies onto the field and playing cards on our opponent's turns. So let's jump into the fun part. What cards do I want to put in? First up, I want to add in more fairies with flash. I'm adding 4. First, Fairy Harbinger, a fairy tutor that has flash. This card is perfect. Not only will it let us tutor for something we need, we can cast it on an opponent's turn to trigger Alayla. I'm also adding in Fairy Mastermind. I've been putting this card into a lot of decks lately. Whenever an opponent draws their second card each turn, you draw a card, and again, Fairy Mastermind has flash and can trigger our commander. Next, I'm adding in Mistbind Click, which is yet another fairy with flash. This card has the ability Champion of Fairy, which means that when this enters the battlefield, sacrifice it unless you exile another fairy you control. When this leaves the battlefield, that card returns to the battlefield. When a fairy is championed with Mistbind Click, tap all lands target player controls. I love the idea of being able to tap all of an opponent's lands, and we either have a fairy token we don't mind exiling, or we can use this to protect one of our fairies, like our commander, from a board wipe. And lastly, Spell Stutter Sprite. You guessed it, another fairy with flash that is perfect for this build. When Spell Stutter Sprite enters the battlefield, counter target spell with mana value X or less, where X is the number of fairies you control, and hopefully we'll have a lot of fairies. I also wanted to put in some enchantments that reward us for getting fairies onto the field and playing cards on our opponent's turns. I'm adding in Bitter Blossom. This card says at the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life and create a 1/1 black fairy rogue creature token with flying. In Commander, life is really a resource, and I love the idea of generating more fairy tokens to support our go wide strategy. Next up, I want to add in Fairy Tauntings, an enchantment that gives us more payoff for casting spells on our opponent's turns. With this card in play, whenever you cast a spell during an opponent's turn, you may have each opponent lose 1 life. I'm also putting in Fairy Trickery. It's an instant that says counter target non-fairy spell. If that spell is countered this way, exile instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. I really love the interaction already in the deck, and I think that leaning into that even more, especially with cards that can trigger our commander, would be really fun. And finally, I'm adding in Kindred Discovery, which is a great typal card that can give us card draw. As Kindred Discovery enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Whenever a creature you control of the chosen type enters the battlefield or attacks, draw a card. And you guys know how I feel about card draw. Now's the tough part. What cards am I gonna cut? I'm gonna cut 1 swamp and 1 island. For my personal build, I'm also gonna trade out some of the lands that enter tapped for lands that either enter untapped or conditionally enter untapped. And so I think with some of those swaps, we'll be totally fine with 37 lands. I'm also cutting Distant Melody, Hullbreaker Horror. It's a good card, but it's not a fairy. Nightmare Unmaking, Night Veil Sprite, Reckless Spite, and Wayfarer's Bauble. And we've got a little mini collector's booster. Let's open it together. Hopefully we get something super good. We've got Hilda's Crown of Winter and Compulsion, but the really pretty foil art. Those are pretty good. That was great. I'm obsessed. Overall, I've had so much fun playing this deck, and I definitely think this is going to become one of my regularly played decks. How do you feel about the Fae Dominion Precon? I'd love to know what you all think about it. Whenever new precons come out, I think it's really fun to consider cards that would go well in the deck. But I don't think that precons need to be upgraded to be really fun to play. If you want to chat about whether or not a precon deck needs to be upgraded, I have a video on that right here, so check it out.